And Will, you're good to go.
Okay, great. Well, welcome everybody to our Sharpen the Saw series. How'd you guys like my my email this morning? I mean, hey, we're talking forms. What could be better, right? I mean, come on. Did anyone pick up on the disclaimer that yes, we were recording, but you can't get CE credit for a Zoom live recorded CE class? However, it has been known to increase proficiencies and professionalism. I was cracking myself up this morning. I thought, everyone's going to think I'm crazy, but I just run with it because that's just, I mean, it's who I am, So anyway, guys, really glad to have us together today. Thank you, Mark O'Brien, our corporate attorney, for joining me, and part of our leadership team. Kevin Larson and Craig are here also to weigh in. And Joe, I appreciate you handling all the technology and all of that.
And Chrissy's here.
And Chrissy's here too. Principal broker. Remember to keep her sane, everyone. Okay, because we don't want our listings canceled. All right, and terminated because she went crazy. So keep her happy and less stressed. Okay, that's our jobs. I think we could probably do a little bit of that today if we were all better masters of these forms. So why are we here? Look, I think it was about 3 or 4 weeks ago, the UAR released 2 new forms and the supporting forms that go along with it. But it's the subject to sale of buyer's property addendum and the option to keep house on market was modified. And so we're gonna talk about these today. If you're paying attention, you realize that subject to sale is dramatically different, right? How many of you have already, had to do, I tell you what, let's take a poll. Tell me if you've already had a deal in which you went under contract with the new subject to sale addendum. Anyone want to let's do a poll here. Hit the chat, let me know. Okay, Jill has. Nicole, yes. Okay, so we got a few. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 out of 72. Okay, 8. Oh, no, Steve says, no, I just want C. Okay, I got you, Steve. Okay, so it's common enough. Mark and I were talking before. I mean, how often do we see these? And in this market that's so fast-paced, we're seeing a lot of offers come in that are subject to the sale. I think many of the properties already under contract. So we're going to talk about that. Look at your learning objectives. Did everybody print out the handout? And a nice shout out to our marketing department to help me create such great looking materials. So today we're going to improve our understanding, of course, of this addendum. We're going to review the overall subject to an option to keep house on market, how to use it. We're going to understand Rev C deadlines and how we put those together with these 2 addendums. We'll understand also better understand the critical negotiation points found in the new language, particularly item B on that addendum. And then we'll understand the release of earnest money implications that happen. And we've got a brain teaser, a courtesy of Craig Lelis that we'll debate. Okay, doesn't that sound like a great way to start our morning?
If you will, Cooper, that's nothing better.
Exactly, right? I mean, this is good stuff. Okay, let's take our first question in our handout. So this one has to do, this question is designed, guys, to give us the reason, wisdom, and why behind all of this, so we can be a position level professional real estate agent. So when do we advise our sellers to consider subject to sale transactions? Let's talk about that for a second. I mean, certainly there's times when you say, well, there's better offers, but tell me what you guys think. And my panel here, Mark, Kevin, Craig, Chrissy, anybody want to weigh in? What do you think? When do we advise our sellers that they should consider an offer that is subject to the sale of another property?
I think you want to look at both sides of the transaction from the seller's perspective and look at the buyer's offer and what the buyer's property for sale looks like From the seller's perspective, you're looking at things like how long has their house been on the market. From the buyer's perspective, you're looking, how is it priced? And you're looking at the same thing on the buyer's side. Is their house priced properly? Is it in the right neighborhood? Is it in a hot market? Is it already under contract? You know, those are things that will lead a seller to either accept or reject a contingent offer.
Also, is it in the seller's best interest to actually go under contract with somebody who needs to sell a property when the market's really hot? Are they going to miss out on other offers that could close quicker? Is it really in the seller's best interest or not?
Right. Or does the seller need time to find another house? Does that buying time help the seller out?
Yeah, good point. Okay, guys, let me give you a couple things to write down right away, and please keep the answers coming. Very good, you guys. And I see Kevin Cameron just joined us. So, hey, Joe, go ahead and unmute Kevin Cameron too. Let's write down, guys, write down a couple things. These are the just, quick points to remember. It's hard to answer any of the questions that Mark and Kevin just brought up if you don't have research and discovery. Okay, so this is an effort on our part as agents to reach out and find out these answers. So in other words, on face value, an offer comes in subject to, that's not enough. We've got to go dig deeper. Some of the obvious answers too, and to just restate what Mark and Kevin had said already, is the market. Okay, so let's write that down. We can analyze the buyer's property and the likeliness of it being able to be sold. We might consider whether or not that contingent property has a more favorable buyer pool. So that's what I've got so far. Anybody else want to? Yeah, if the property, obviously in reverse of that, if the property is so unique it can't sell, I'm just looking at Julie's comment, that may reduce the buyer pool. Kind of when we say unique, that's obvious. Sometimes that's realtor code for difficult to sell, could be. But I like all your chats, guys, and thank you for keeping them coming. Rachel said if the home's been on the market for 5 years, yeah, you probably should consider an offer.
Yeah. Another thing to consider, and you may have to actually go and visit the home on behalf of your client, is the condition of the home. A lot of times photographs don't tell the whole story, and you drive by the house or you schedule an appointment to view it and go back to your client and go, we don't want to tie our future to this one. It's a dog.
Yeah, this reminds me, guys, some of you know that my dad, my father, dad, not my stepdad, he's a physician. And when I was a teenager, I would shadow him in the emergency room and put scrubs on. And that was a really amazing learning experience because my dad had an amazing bedside manner. He was very kind. He was very patient. And of course, some of the people that we were seeing had flu-like symptoms. And yes, they were not feeling so well, but there was really nothing that, an emergency room doctor is going to do much for the flu. But I was amazed at how well he took the time to ask the questions to confirm where the patient was. We're an awful lot like that. If we kind of get in a hurry with our discovery and we get in a hurry with questions, because questions take time, right? Because it's conversation. And sometimes we just want to go right, skip over steps. And when you do that, you often miss a better diagnosis because the discovery was not as accurate as it could have been. Okay, so thank you for all. Let's move on to the next question. So are there situations where subject to sale transactions are better than other non-subject to sale transactions? If so, what are they? The reason I put this down, this question, is so we could also reverse it if we were writing the offer and we could amplify the best things about our subject to offer, okay? To win the bid, if we've got to be subject to, what are some things that would make our offer better even though it was conditioned? There's a real obvious one. I'm just going to say it and then we can go from there. Our offer is a higher price. All right. So we could have a very, very competitive price. So let's write that one down. But what else? What other terms could we might be better or more compelling in these subject to sale transactions? What do you think, guys? Light it up, and panel, weigh in.
Contingencies have passed and all we're waiting for is settlement. That certainly makes it more attractive than a non-subject to sale offer where the contingency deadlines may be out in the future.
Great point. If we're writing an offer after our buyer has already gone through due diligence and financing and appraisal, wow, we've got a really good offer, don't we? All right, we can feel pretty good about that. So think about the timing of the buyers and their deadline, right? Very good. So write that one down, guys. That's our second answer, is Rep C deadlines have passed or completed. This one, the next one got brought up earlier, but not to, guess the instructor's mind, but there's other terms in the Rep C that could be more compelling even though you're subject to. What are they? Swin's kind of got it here. So it's generally, but let me, so settlement deadline, possession, and occupancy can sometimes be really great terms for our seller to consider. Do you find it a little odd that we ask sellers to move out in like 24 hours after they get their money? Isn't that a little odd? I think if you've ever been a seller on that side and you're like, wait, it doesn't record until Friday and I'm going to be out Saturday. So the deal isn't really done until Friday and I'm going to just pack in one day. Isn't that a little, odd? If you've ever been a seller, you felt that. If you're on the real estate side, you go, yeah, what's the problem? I don't understand. Come on, get moving, right? But we tell people don't pack, don't you pack yet. I had a seller, some of you have heard this story, but I had a seller tell me, Will, I'm not going to pack a fork until I have my money. And I said, well, you could leave the forks. I think the buyer would be fine with
that. I got it, Will.
Yeah, you got it. Okay. Okay. Hey, Joe, I need humor sound effects here. So, panel, you have to be the laugh track. But what if we wrote offers that had longer possession? Yeah. What if we did that? Could that help? Could that be a benefit to give them more time to accommodate their needs? So I'd highly recommend you thinking about that one.
Yeah, but also if they're going to do that, got to make sure that there's a lease back to cover that period from recording till they actually have the seller move out using the board approved form of short-term lease back. Don't you write a lease in an addendum that basically seller can stay, and got to make sure who's responsible for what and cover liability and all those types of things. So use the form if you're going to go down that road, but it's very, very attractive to sellers. They may take that offer only because it gives them a week to move out.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, Mark.
Yes.
Let's cue the attorney. How many days do you think in possession do we then queue up the short-term lease back? Is there something in your mind that says, well, if it's this many days, we're okay with possession, but if it's this many days, we should go to the rent back? What do you think?
I would say, offhand, I'd say 7 days. We want to go ahead with the lease back. A short amount of time, a day or two, I'm comfortable. Once you start approaching 7 days, anything beyond 7 days, I would say we want to go ahead and go through the formality of the form.
Perfect.
Generally, we're talking pretty de minimis expenses in 7 days, but beyond that, we're getting into accumulating expenses.
Yeah. Sometimes you guys, I ask these open-ended questions of Mark and I'm sitting here crossing my fingers going, I hope we see this the same. We do see it the same. I think that's pretty consistent on what we've been teaching and advising. Certainly if we get past 7 days, we need that rent back. Okay. Very good. Thanks, Kev, for bringing that one up. I appreciate that. Okay. So let's move on to the next one. Do market conditions influence the decision to entertain subject to transactions? Look, it's obviously yes, but that's not why I asked the question. Okay, so I wanted to talk about what the market is. So let's go to the next question. Market conditions are always a factor when considering subject to sell transactions. How can we better look at the market, quote unquote, for our subject property? Okay. I'm getting in a little off topic, but because we're looking at subject to sale and because the wisdom is whether or not we should even entertain them, then we have to be really good at understanding what market is. So when you hear the word market, I want it to trigger a more detailed thought. And so I'm going to ask you guys, how do you look at this market? I mean, you get questions all the time that say, how's the market? Well, that's really broad. It could be the United States, it could be Utah, it could be Park City, it could be Wasatch Front, it could be Moab. I mean, it could be, it could be general speaking. So let me put down the first answer. That's the obvious one. When we think market, we might first think location market. Okay, so like, boom, location. But that goes deeper than just say Park City, right? Right? That could be a very specific market within Park City, right? It could be down to a subdivision. Park Meadows. How's the market in Park Meadows? Very location, centered. What other types of market are there? Yes, right. Ski in, ski out. Now we start to get to different kinds of property. So what other things might trigger a market that properties compete with each other within inside of a group? Okay, so how do you, go ahead, Mark.
I would say schools.
Okay, so school boundaries. So again, kind of locate under the heading location, not just subdivision, right? But now we got school districts. If the school district is a high demand, then we're going to find people who want property within there, and those properties then compete with inside of a location. Okay. What else, guys? Keep it
Could be
like
within
that.
a project, what project listing, like a large condo project. Depends how many other properties are on the market that affect, how compelling your property is. So if there's more competition, the market is not as good as if you're the only one on the market.
Yeah, very, very, very good. So now we're talking about, and I see it lighting up. Kev says condos. So let's do this. Let me give you a couple of bullet points, guys, to write down. Location could be described as schools, and you've got subdivisions or condo projects, okay? The next group is price ranges. So someone said luxury. Sometimes we say luxury is, what is that? Is it over 2 million? Is it over 750? I mean, we've even debated that within our own firm. What is luxury? But luxury is a price range of competition. Okay, so let's remember that. The next one is the type of property. And when I say type, just think MLS searches, condo, single family, horse property, someone said ski in, ski out. So that's the type of property. Now we can have competition within types of property, right? Okay, then we get styles that can compete. That's the next one, styles. So this could be, well, I only want a rambler, we want a two-story because we like all the bedrooms, we're a family, whatever the needs are. And they're okay with, they want amenities, common areas. So now that's starting to speak to maybe a condominium style, a style home. Ramon brings up age. Yes, there could be, historical competition or new construction could compete with itself, right? If we put that on its head. You can see already, guys, if we were shallow thinking of market, we're missing the wisdom behind whether or not we take these subject to sales, okay? We've got to go dig, discover, research, and find how we compete. And that will start to answer questions on not only our subject property that we're getting the offer on, but also the property in which needs to sell in order for our property to close, okay? Anything else on that, guys, on that question? subject to, this market answer. Anything else? Am I missing?
Several people have talked about the HOA where the property is located. That's significant up here. We have a few HOAs that are really kind of in trouble because of mismanagement.
Okay.
And while the market may be hot in Park City and a lot of things are selling, those particular ones are not because of the issues going on. And you need to, kind of dig and discover if there's any issues that are keeping those properties from selling.
Great point. So would I put HOA under location? I could, if that's a location based and defined by borders, or I could put that under type. It's a condo and in that kind of a market.
Kraus just said, yeah, my Waldorf listing. That's exactly what I was thinking, Mike.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Got it. So, it is sold, he said.
Mm.
Yeah, well, I think another important one might be land use matters for land use issues going on around subject properties in a particular location. We've seen that become a particular interesting issue up here in Park City lately with a proposed annexation. So those types of things might influence how you are representing or describing a property to a buyer or a seller.
Perfect. I wrote that down. Very good. So sometimes we don't consider the what's happening outside the property.
Right.
Not the property itself, but it's something going around the property.
Right.
Very good. My objective here, guys, really, frankly, the form I think is pretty simple. We'll get into it in about 5 minutes. The forms are pretty simple, but the key point is what we just talked about. This has got to be us. We've got to raise the bar in how we look at market. And that's what they want from us. Remember, our role is to help them net the most, our seller clients, right? That's why we're hired. In order to do that, we've got to dig deeper in the discovery and how we compete. So when someone says, should I take a subject to sale offer? Then we think we've got to do market research to answer that question, And it's more than just no. We don't look at those. The market's too hot. It's not always the right answer, right? And remember, guys, when you're on the writing side of this and you're repping a buyer, remember to amplify the good points of your offer, even though it's subject to. Because look at how many we've already pulled out. Okay. All right, let's go on to the next question. Which section of the REPC, just go ahead, guys, and grab your chat, and let's see how well you know this. This will prove your participation in CE as well. What section of the REPC asks the buyer to affirm whether or not the transaction is conditioned upon the sale of another property? So go ahead and write that in. Should get everybody, about 80 answers should show up here.
This is much better than the how many times does it appear?
Right. Yeah, didn't we do that with earnest money?
We did.
We did. We said, how many times does earnest money appear in the REPC? Yeah, that was I don't know, 5, 3, 9, 14. Yeah, we got a lot of different answers. Okay, yeah, the answer is 2.2. And talk about phoning a friend. Everybody looked at what Mark Erickson had wrote first, and then said, yeah, that sounds right. Mark's a smart guy. Okay, we're going to talk about next. We're going to talk about the timing of REPC deadlines. And this is going to answer that question on the strength of the offer. So let's turn the page, and I'm going to look at our image there with the two scenarios. So one, we've got the buyer's house is for sale, but it's not under contract. I'm going to have to go ahead and share screen now, guys. So, and pull that up. Whoops, here we go. Okay. So scenario number one is we don't have an offer yet on the property. So let's just debate that one for a minute. Have you ever had anyone say they wanted to write an offer, but their house is not under contract and it's not listed, and they wanted to just sell it on their own?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we have had that, right? Well, our form, go ahead, what, Kev?
Because it's easy.
Oh, yeah, it's a piece of cake. Anyone can do it. All of the above last week, Jackie. Yeah, it does happen. I know a lot of us will kind of chuckle at that. It's, bless their hearts, right? They don't understand what they're getting into yet. But on that form, I'm going to just fast forward to the form. Down here it says buyer's property is not currently listed. And then it says, but it will be. So you do appreciate the UAR helping us progress someone who is not yet listed, who will be listed. That may be a weaker offer, of course, depending on that market of that property, as we just talked about. But that's essentially how we do that. Just by contrast, the other form, we had to come up with hypotheticals. Remember all this? With the other form, you had to have a hypothetical date when it would close, hypothetical date on when. And notice there's no deadlines on this form. Okay, so it's a lot easier in the sense that we're not trying to project or predict. We are going to talk about these other deadlines in a minute, but I wanted to just first kind of get this one out of the way. The house is not under contract, it's not listed, and you get an offer. How might you look at that? Have any of you, Mark, I'm kind of going off script a little.
Sure.
It reminds me of something. Sorry.
I didn't know we had a script.
Oh. There's always a script. There's always a script. Have any of you ever been, I don't know if tempted is the right word, but contemplated seriously about having our buyer prove their ability to perform? I'm going to stop sharing for a second just so we can talk about this. Have you ever thought, I want them to give me documentation, or I don't even want to go under contract, and the seller doesn't want to go under contract? Maybe they've been burned before, but they wanted to know what they were getting into before they even entered the contract, and you're kind of stuck because you want to make it formal, you're thinking of making it formal, but there's really nothing out there. Anyone ever had this? Look, I know some of you have, because you've called me to ask, how do we, the seller doesn't want to, proof of their ability or evidences. They kind of want to act like a pre-approval, like a lender would, and they want to play that role. A few of you have, Swin, Audrey. This might come up in our higher price points. Kev, do you get this one? Do you get sellers sometimes?
Sellers a lot of times want to know the buyer's ability to perform. Sometimes when it's cash, they're going to ask for not a bank statement, but a letter from the banker indicating they have assets that are liquid, sufficient to perform in the transaction.
Yeah, because they don't even want to go under contract. Maybe they've got hot buyers that are looking and they're reluctant. So, by the way, so Mark, I thought we might want to put together some language that would help our seller clients navigate that, subject. So it would be a seller condition, because they'd have to have the right to cancel if they're not happy with what they see. Of course, that could be done prior to acceptance, but
prior to acceptance is kind of how I envision it playing out. I mean, it's what you're trying to do in analyzing an offer. This is what the seller is trying to do in analyzing an offer, is looking at whether there's, what their deadlines look like, whether there's financing and appraisal, how much earnest money they're putting down. This is the next step, and I think it's a good one. It's asking a lot of a buyer, but not necessarily in this market.
Yeah, a lot of times I've seen the seller say, within 4 days of acceptance of this offer, the buyer must produce. And if the seller's not satisfied with what the buyer provides, the seller has the option of canceling. But that's always written differently by agents, and sometimes they get in trouble with those clauses.
Yes, there you go, Kev. That's it. Mark works. We see it a lot, enough to have a problem. So we might want to write something that's simple there. But if we could do it before acceptance, that's best.
That's ideal, yes.
Yeah, because now we've got options, and it's just some of these buyers are reluctant to give up, confidential information. until they know the seller's committed to them as well. So it does become a negotiation point.
That sometimes becomes subjective too. We had an instance in the colony where the seller had that written in there. The seller determined the buyer wasn't qualified or didn't like what they received, and they canceled it. And that buyer was very, very well qualified. It almost ended up in a lawsuit, but they turned around and bought a house worth $4 million more.
Yeah, interesting. I think I was aware of that one. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll just say, Will, quickly, before acceptance is ideal, and I think this is a concept that's outside of the state-approved forms.
Yeah.
So I don't think it would be prudent for agents to be attempting to draft this type of language on their own.
Right.
So I do think it's maybe something the company should take on. If that's something that's becoming more and more common in practice, then we should take it on. But I don't think agents should be attempting to do that via addenda.
Yeah, personally, I like the idea of having it in the library and with the same kind of admonishment that we don't use every form every time, but we're wise enough to know when we need it.
Right.
We do encourage them to get this done pre-acceptance, but if it's just absolutely can't happen, the last thing we want to do is have an agent write on a blank addendum, seller to approve, buyer's documentation, and try to write language for that. We could find ourselves in an argument over that language, and then we become the target, guys, because we authored it. So we got to be very careful there. The reason I bring that up and the reason it triggered is because when we're back to looking at this, under contract, not under contract scenario, you're going to find yourself the seller's going to ask questions. Can the buyer even do this? And that's why that triggered it. So there again, research and questions need to be discovered before we enter that kind of a contract for our sellers. Okay. The next one we're going to spend a lot more time on. This is one that we get that's pending already, and then we get the offer, and then we've got these deadlines to deal with, and then I want to debate what may happen, which is our option to keep house on market. So, guys, let's jump to the form now. We're about halfway through the class, so we're doing pretty well on time. Let's jump to the subject to sell condition form. Let me give a quick tour, and then panel, feel free to weigh in. So what has dramatically changed here? First of all, it's very simple, but it is subject to the sale. So it is a condition, okay? It is a contingency that is overarching, okay? So let's read A, buyer's right to cancel before, so I've highlighted this, before due diligence, buyer may cancel at their sole discretion. Again, we see that language show up a couple times in the rep sheet, so it's not open to debate on why they did. They just did. If the buyer has not closed on the property, providing written notice to the seller no later than the due diligence reference in 24B, or the financing appraisal deadline, which is later, whereupon the earnest money is released to who? Released to buyer. Okay, so this is the cancel before deadlines concept. You cancel before deadlines, it goes back to you, even though it's conditioned. B is the material change, which is going to shift a lot of how we write offers in these scenarios. This is buyer's right to cancel after due diligence. So quickly, same language, but it's released to seller, right? So cancel after due diligence or financing and appraisal, then that earnest money goes to seller. Okay, so even though you're conditioned upon the closing, if you can't perform as a buyer, you're going to lose that earnest money deposit. Okay, so that's really important to remember because that is not what we had before. This is putting perhaps a more fair position where buyer and sellers equally share the reason behind this, guys, so why is it this way? That's because we got a nuclear bomb the day of settlement that said, sorry, buyer's property did not close on time. The buyer failed to perform. They've canceled, and we're going to do the same. And our sellers were left with no compensation at all. They were damaged, didn't like how that went. In many cases, they've even packed, and there was expenses there. Okay. So that is the first section. I guess I'll pause there. Mark, Kevin, panel, Craig, anybody want to weigh in on any of that I might have missed?
What I'm saying,
answer Rachel Moody's question.
Okay. Okay, Craig, do you want to go first, and then I'll get to Rachel?
What I'm seeing that since we're tying the contingency and the earnest money to the contingencies that were already on the contract, the finance and appraisal deadline and the due diligence deadline, I'm seeing agents use this form and push out the finance and appraisal deadline farther than usual in order to protect that earnest money.
Yeah, Craig's spot on, guys. That's what's going to happen. So as listing agents, we need to be, I guess, aware. First of all, what that play might be. They might make financing appraisal, 3 or 4 days before settlement, or 2 days, or 1 day. So that might be a negotiation point. Part of our learning objectives today was to talk about key negotiation points. This is it. So you might want to look at that financing and appraisal, not might, you have to look at financing and appraisal differently than you did previously. That's a key point. The only way to protect our seller is to make that short enough where there is at least some money on the line for our sellers. Buyer agents, you might be tempted to write that way out. I suppose in representing a buyer, as long as you can win the bid and get away with it, fine. But that's just so we're all clear on what the rule is. Okay. All right. To Rachel's point, I think it's, Rachel, what happens if the buyer has not put their home on the market within 7 days of acceptance? So that moves us on to the next paragraph here. If they have agreed to put it on the market, here it says, so it is or is not currently listed on the MLS through a brokerage. In the event buyer's property is not currently listed for sale through the brokerage, buyer agrees the property will be listed on the MLS or within 7 days. So to Rachel's point, this is a breach of contract or a default on the seller, or, I'm sorry, our buyer, who does not put the property on the market as they promised to do so in the addendum. So that would trigger what section of the Rep C if they're in default? So if we're in default of the term, what do we do? And I think this is going to open up the debate on what happens. So this is a great question. So panel, do you want to weigh in before we all tackle this together?
I just want to raise the issue. What if the staff just didn't get it across? They didn't get to it at the end of that day. It actually was listed and the contract showed that they had listed it. It technically was listed because the contract was signed within the 7 days, but it didn't get across the MLS in time.
Well, when you list a property, you only have 1 day to get it on the MLS. So you're really talking only a 1 day problem there, right, Kev?
No, you have 5 days to get it across from the contract date.
Yeah, once the time we list it, we have 5, but to Kev Cam, remember guys, if it's listed clear cooperation, and I mean, when I say listed, I mean marketed. If it's marketed, then we've got 1 day that's triggered that. So there's a couple of little nuances here.
In this case, if you were representing the buyer, I would warn them that they need to get their listing on the market right away because they are in breach or in default, and the seller, it's just like seller's disclosure deadline. It's a hard deadline in the contract, which means the other side can cancel the contract and go after earnest money for damages.
And it says it will be listed on the MLS, not just a listing contract signed.
Right.
That's my point. That's why they only have 1 day after. I think it's got to be on the MLS. So what is the case? It goes to buyer default, obviously, 16.1, I think it is. But the problem we get is a lot of agents come back to the old rule of, is the contract voidable? I don't think we have a situation where we have a voidable contract anymore. We have an offer we can cancel. This will be a cancellation based on buyer default. And if you read the buyer default section, you just follow those situations right there. But
Mark, do you want to weigh in? I've got a thought on this. Go ahead.
The reality is there is a buyer default if it's not listed on the multiple listing service. And as Craig said, it's really going to be the buyer's agent's responsibility to make sure that that happens. So technically under 16.1, there would be a buyer default. The reality is there's going to be wrangling over whether or not there's earnest money released. No one's going to allow their earnest money to be released over a failure to list.
that's right. It's going to be a battle. It's just not going to happen.
Okay,
Right.
buyer's agent. So let's put our buyer agent hat on. It's day 6. I guess either you're not the agent. If you are the agent, then, you know, shame on us for not hitting the deadline and getting it on the MLS. But if they happen to list with somebody else, and that's still not on, protect the buyer. You got to come up here and you got to play this card. You got to cancel prior to. Even though the due diligence is still a week away, you could cancel and save the buyer their earnest money. Now that triggers this language. But if we just let this 7 days pass, we're going to be in default and we're going to get an argument. Right? So that's a strategy that could be employed where we just come up here and say, well, on day 6, you know, I'm going to have to cancel.
Or ask for an extension, like Brad just said.
Or we could extend if we want to keep deals alive, which we do. We could just say, you know, in regards to Section 2 of the subject to sale of buyer's property addendum, buyer and seller agree to extend the time for the buyer to put the house on the MLS, right? We can do that and keep the deal alive. Or I think we need to play this to protect their money. Otherwise, we're going to end up with an argument over that because we're going to think 16 and it triggers a default, but then we're going to get a debate. Okay.
Don't bring the listing in on the 7th day at 4:45 and then blame the staff for it not being across the MLS.
Yeah.
You know, come
Good
on.
point, Kev.
Yeah.
I have to go back a little bit. Sorry. I mean, I had unmuting problems, Joe. I don't know if you saw my text about 45 minutes ago. I could not get unmuted. Sorry. I had started on my iPhone, my new iPhone, trying to get to the computer. It was a mess. But anyway, I finally figured it out. But bottom line is, in this market, I wouldn't even use this form because I wouldn't sell my home subject to the sale of anybody's house. You know, forget it. But we still have to learn this form because this will come into play big time as the markets change. But I know a lot of you don't like it. A lot of you have called me. I get it. You don't like this losing the buyer's money after the due diligence deadline. I see your point of view, but you've got to look at it from the seller's point of view. They've been drug out to the final day and been able to cancel because their home didn't go under contract. It's not fair to the seller. That's why we've done this.
Right.
There's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think most of the time, exactly what Kevin said is right. I'm trying to raise the bar where we think critically and really debate whether or not we should take these so that we're analyzing it. In a lot of ways, guys, it's like my dad interviewing someone in the emergency room who has the flu. I mean, you could just look at him and go, look, you got the flu, you're wasting my time, get out of here, we're not interested. But we can't really do that. We've got to take the time to discover whether or not the market might indicate whether we should entertain one. And there's obviously different levels to this, but most of the time, yeah, I think our advice across all the managers is, guys, why are we entertaining a subject to when you've had so many showings, so much interest? You should just be more patient and wait for a better offer. Most of the time, that's what we're seeing right now. I mean, this is as hot as the market's ever been in anyone's career right now, right? Anyone want to debate that? This is the hottest market we've ever seen in decades, ever, in history of the United States. In the history of the universe, no alien planet has ever sold dwellings as fast as.
That's true.
Someone said to me the other day, I got to stop sharing for a second. This was like toilet paper. Remember the toilet paper thing? Well, that's the houses. Yeah. How come there's nothing for sale in my neighborhood I want to live in? Toilet paper. Yeah. So, okay, let's move on. I can't believe how fast these CE classes go. Let's go on to what's likely to be countered here. That's the option to keep house on market. And then we're going to get to Craig's brain teaser. And so Craig, get ready to tee that up. So sometimes we might consider to take this offer, but we want to continue to market it. In these cases, this is, we've determined that the buyer's property is more likely to sell than the property we have listed. So, okay. But in case there's another buyer, we counter with this, and let's say we go under contract. So right to accept other offers, buyer and seller agree, seller may continue to offer the property for sale and accept backup offers. So if you want to make a note to yourself right here, that's called secondary backup offer. and it is in your handout. If you go to the search on MLS and type backup, it doesn't show up. You got to take secondary. That's the heading. And in the seller's sole discretion, may notify buyer in writing of an accepted backup offer. Okay. Notice that language in the seller's sole discretion, they might notify you, they might not. So they could keep that backup offer, to themselves and never notify, because if they do notify, it does trigger these things. Again, that's an interesting strategy here. You may decide not to trigger what's here. And yes.
That's a significant change in seller's sole discretion. We've had scenarios where we have a backup offer, and the backup buyer and the backup agent are harassing the listing agent. Have you given your notice, your option? Have you called your time clause?
Yeah.
And listing agents, no, I haven't yet. We're giving them a couple more days to work out their problems. And the secondary offer starts saying, I want you to call the time clause. I insist you call the time clause. I'm going to contact an attorney to make you call your time clause. And it's been a confusing issue for the listing agents. Of course, they didn't have to do that before, but now it's spelled out in seller's sole discretion. They don't have to call the time clause if they don't want to. If they want to give buyer number one a little more time to work out some problems, that's okay.
Yeah, very, very good point. That's a very, material change. I think it's going to go into your brain teaser, isn't it, Craig, a little bit about how we strategically look at these. So we might be lighting your path a little bit, guys, on what the question is going to be. So item B, buyer's right to remove the condition. If seller does provide the written notice, then the buyer has so many days. A lot of times that's, 2 days, 3 days after receipt of seller's written notice to provide seller with the removal conditions, and then you've got the boxes. Most of the time, my recommendation is to remove every condition, because if you've gone this far and you've got a secondary offer, it's because it's better than the offer you already have. So to the seller's point, you want all those gone. Now you can debate this and negotiate it, and the buyer may resist and say, well, that's not fair because I don't have enough time to perform. Well, yeah, but you're basically back to bidding against another competing buyer is what that's going to end up looking like, right? So my advice to our listing agents is to have all those marked because you want them gone. The additional earnest money, I love this being added back in and re-emphasized from section 8.4 of the REPC, because it's not a bad term. For one, you don't have to pay more as a buyer to make your offer stronger, right? You're not paying more. It doesn't cost you more. What you're doing is making a more solid commitment to the seller, which gives them comfort. And this is a key negotiating point that can go both ways, and it's a win-win for buyer and seller. D is if the buyer does not remove this, and this is key, guys, highlight this, where it says if they don't remove it, the REPC becomes canceled and earnest money goes to who? Make sure you understand this. If they don't remove the conditions, and so the seller called them due, to Craig's point, they don't remove it, buyer gets the earnest money. Okay? Okay. Craig, we only have 7 minutes left, so let's hit the brain teaser. Go ahead and read your brain teaser to everybody. Here we go.
Well, okay, I'll try to put it in a nutshell. Buyer uses a subject to sale addendum, and the seller counters with an option to keep house on market addendum. The seller calls the time clause after the buyer's last deadline, usually the financing deadline. The time clause addendum says that the earnest money should go back to the buyer if the buyer cannot remove the subject to sell contingency. The subject to sell addendum says that the earnest money will go to the seller if the buyer cancels after the last deadline. Where does the earnest money go?
Dun, 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 dun. Uh-oh, dilemma. My goodness, what's going to happen? Great one, Craig. We got a running start at this. The panel did earlier, guys. But what do you think? Who prevails here? Are we intrigued?
Which addendum was first?
Okay, so subject to sale came first, then we countered with option to keep house on market. Mark?
I'm seeing a lot of buyers, which is good. I agree that the earnest money goes to the buyer.
In that exact scenario, okay, in that exact scenario with those timeline points, the last addendum, option to keep house on market, controls. Okay, so if okay, guys, we got to think about this. The seller may not want to trigger that time clause. Okay, this is a strategy. If they trigger the time clause, it's going to trigger that language. If we are post financing an appraisal already, think about where you are in your deal. If we're post financing an appraisal, then the earnest money is already allocated to the seller if the seller cancels. But the seller would have to ride that all the way out to settlement, right? If the seller gets a better offer and then they decide to trigger the time clause, it's going to trigger that the earnest money goes to who? Mark?
Buyer.
Goes to the buyer.
Yeah.
Well, another way to look at this is you're not going to have the option to keep property on market unless you have the subject to, right?
Yep.
And the subject to is also a condition that needs to be released following the seller's notice. So just because the financing and appraisal deadline and due diligence have passed doesn't mean the contingency subject to has passed. So if the buyer does not waive that, then section 1D of the option to keep property on market still applies. The earnest money goes to to be contradictory, but you have to play it out in a sequential form to kind of come to the answer.
At that late date, if the seller cancels, then they're giving up the earnest money, and in exchange, if you will, for being able to cancel. If the buyer cancels at that late date, the buyer loses their earnest money, which seems fair because they've kept the seller off the market. So it's a really brilliant combination between the two addendums, and it's more fair than it used to be.
So you know what we may see now? We may see us consider not countering with the option to keep house on market. We might just say, all right, we'll ride it out with you, because after that financing and appraisal, we know we're at least entitled to that earnest money if you cancel.
And go for additional earnest money if you're representing the seller.
Perhaps, yeah, we could counter the earnest money amount to make it significant enough to keep ourselves from being on. So when I said on sales meeting, would you rather have an active status or an active TC status as a listing agent? Does active TC hurt your marketability? Yes.
It does.
It does. Because it's telling another buyer that you already have an offer out there. So
yeah,
how better?
Yeah, I agree with you. Well, it does hurt, but if it's under contract, you have no ability to get another offer unless you put backup status, I guess.
Well, and that's the play that's kind of new to us. You know, we started this new status a couple of years ago of backup status. It's really indicating that maybe we're not too sure that our offer will sell. So think about this is a domino effect, guys. The subject to sell is different. It's got some teeth to it, to the buyer. They got to put some skin in the game, which is now causing us to consider whether or not we'll even use the option to keep house on market, which now might put us into a backup status, looking for a secondary offer, which we communicate with agents and buyers that we have an offer. It is subject to the sale of another property, but we're not active TC. Yeah? Is everyone just going, what?
See how much easier it is if you just don't take that kind of an action.
Right. Yep. But you know what, guys? The complexities are our business. We should celebrate. It's this is why we're worth every penny of our commission, because even though we do these surgeries all the time, the fact is they're very complicated. They have extreme liability. You can really damage people. They could damage themselves, and they're better to have you. So, we continue to sharpen our saw. Any takeaways? We got about 2 minutes, and I want to turn this off. So any takeaways that we may not have addressed, or things you really liked from what we talked about today? Was this worth our time? Was this worth the hour together? Okay, good. Good. Okay, well, I'm glad to hear that. It's always my pleasure to research and study and organize this content for all of us. I'm very proud of who we are as a company, and the culture in which we created to be high-level professionals. So,
the bottom line is we had 80-something people on this call. We have 500 agents in this company. This form is what you have to use. The old form doesn't work anymore. And you're going to see the old form show up, and you're going to have to fix it, because that form's obsolete now, isn't it, Will? They can't use that form anymore.
Yeah, anytime they update it, we're admonished to go ahead and go with the changes. I mean, that becomes a standard. And if an agent is outside those boundaries and something happens, we're going to become the target.
Yeah, so when you get an offer that has the old subject to the sale addendum, you don't have to call Will or Lance or Craig or myself or Mike or any of the brokers. You just let the agent know they used the wrong form and get it fixed. Because you're pushing the envelope if you do. So, and I know you might like it better, but you're still pushing the envelope. So think through it.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and conclude. Kev and Cam, thank you so much. Kev Larson, Craig, Mark, thank you so much, and I do appreciate.
Mark, stay on for a second, will you? I got a question.
Certainly, no problem.
Angie, thanks for taking our role today and all of that. I sure love you guys. I pray every day that you're successful in your ability to help our clients well. And you sure do a good job of that. We're proud to support you. We're happy.
Are your prayers being answered right now, Will?
Yeah, well, not just mine, of course, but we're always happy to answer your questions. Remember, we're thrilled when you call us. If it's late at night, who do you call?
Will Cooper.
All right, guys, have a wonderful day and a wonderful week. Thank you for joining us for our Sharpen the Saw series. We'll see you next time.